The United States has the most powerful military on Earth. It has the most advanced technology and a defense budget larger than the next 10 nations combined. But there's one truth Washington doesn't like to admit. To build every chip, every jet engine, and every weapon that defines modern warfare, it depends on China. That resource isn't oil, it isn't gold, it's rare earth elements. 17 obscure metals buried deep within the Earth's crust. You've probably never heard their names: neodymium, terbium, dysprosium. But without them, the modern world stops. No smartphones, no electric vehicles, no satellites, no fighter jets. Every gram of these strange metals is a drop of blood in the veins of modern technology. And over 90% of global refining happens under China's control. When America talks about a tech war, Beijing doesn't argue. It simply smiles. Because China understands a truth the West forgot. Real power doesn't live in software. It lives in hardware, in the physical world, in the materials that nobody wants to mine because they're toxic, messy, and hard to handle. In the late 20th century, when Western nations shut down their mines to protect the environment, China did the opposite. It accepted pollution. It traded clean air for experience and short-term pain for long-term power. While the West celebrated regulations and sustainability, China quietly built refineries, trained chemists, and learned how to separate, purify, and control the entire supply chain of the future. They didn't chase headlines, they chased mastery. 2 decades later, the results are clear. When the world began racing toward green energy, China was already selling the materials that made it possible. The United States can print dollars, but it can't print neodymium. It can speak of independence, but it can't build a microchip without europium or terbium. It can promise self-reliance, but still buys the minerals of its own power from the very rival it's trying to contain. The real power of this century doesn't come from oil or from code. It comes from the dust beneath our feet, the metals no one wanted. And the one who controls them isn't sitting in Washington. It's sitting in Beijing. China didn't just dig into the ground. It bought the ground itself. While the rest of the world was busy arguing about carbon emissions and green transitions, Beijing was quietly sending its state-owned companies across the planet, into Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, to buy stakes in mines, build processing plants, and secure the railways and ports to move ore straight back to China. No need to conquer land, no need to wave a flag. All they had to do was control the flow of materials. Because in the modern world, whoever controls the input controls the outcome. In the 1990s, when America's Mountain Pass mine shut down, the excuse was simple: environmental costs were too high. But while the US was walking away, China was doubling down. It lowered taxes, subsidized production, and poured billions into the unglamorous science of chemical separation and refining. Western companies called it dirty. Beijing called it strategy. And over time, the difference showed. While the US and Europe built regulations, China built capacity. While the West invested in apps and stock markets, China invested in pipes, furnaces, and chemistry. They turned what the world threw away into leverage. Today, if America mines rare earths in California, it still has to ship the ore to China for refining. Then it buys the finished metals back at a higher price. A perfect circle of dependency, wrapped in the polite language of free trade. Beijing doesn't have to fight wars to project power anymore. It just has to sign export papers. In 2010, China restricted rare earth exports to Japan for only a few weeks. Prices skyrocketed tenfold. Global markets panicked. Then, just as calmly, Beijing lifted the ban, as if to say, we can do this whenever we want. That wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. A demonstration of what true leverage looks like in the 21st century. Western analysts called it coercion, but to China, it was just economics, the simple logic of supply and demand, executed with surgical precision. And while Washington tries to rebuild its industrial base with money, Beijing has been building it with time. Because in this kind of race, money buys machines, but time builds empires. Rare earths are the new oil. They don't power engines with fire. They power civilization with magnetism. Every industry that defines the future runs on them. Artificial intelligence, renewable energy, electric vehicles, semiconductors, and advanced weapons. Remove rare earths from that equation, and the modern world grinds to a halt. Electric cars need kilos of neodymium and dysprosium just to spin their wheels. Wind turbines require hundreds of kilos to generate power. An F-35 fighter jet uses almost half a ton of rare earths in its radar, guidance systems, and sensors. Without these metals, the future simply doesn't work. And China controls over 90% of the processing that makes them usable. In this new age, rare earths are not just resources. They are the oxygen of progress, the fuel of AI, the DNA of modern industry. And if you control the oxygen, you don't need to pull a trigger to make your rivals suffocate. When America once ruled through oil, it dictated the terms of globalization. When OPEC turned off the taps in the 1970s, it made superpowers beg. Now, China doesn't need to fight. It only needs to pause exports for a month, and the world would feel what dependency truly means. Because no country has a plan B, or can be found elsewhere, but the refining, the separation, the knowledge of how to turn rock into value, that all lies in China. Even if the US invests billions today, it's still decades behind. You can buy machines. You can't buy 30 years of chemical expertise. It's the quietest form of power and the hardest to replace. China understood this long before anyone else. In the 1990s, Deng Xiaoping said, "The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths." Most of the world laughed, but he wasn't making a joke. He was writing a strategy. While others chased apps and algorithms, China focused on atoms, on the tangible, the physical, the dirty foundations of progress that everyone else ignored. They built the Shanghai Rare Earth Exchange. They added the minerals to their national reserves. They encouraged domestic companies to master magnet manufacturing and high-efficiency motors. They turned pollution into policy, and policy into power. When Washington builds tariffs, Beijing builds walls of raw material. And in a world shifting from oil to electricity, those walls are stronger than steel. The danger isn't that China dominates rare earths. The danger is that they now dominate every industry that depends on them. Electric vehicles, wind energy, chip manufacturing, defense systems. Each one is a pillar of the modern economy, and every single one leans on China. This is not a trade imbalance, it's a strategic chokehold, a quiet reminder that in the 21st century, wars aren't fought with bullets anymore, they're fought with supply chains. China is 20 years ahead. The rest of the world is still debating where to start, but time is running out. Global demand for rare earths is expected to triple by 2030, and China doesn't need to expand much further. It just needs to keep the lead it already has. The world calls it the rare earth trap. China simply calls it leverage. Every empire in history has been built on a single resource. For Britain, it was coal. For America, it was oil. For China, it's rare earths. None of them gained dominance by accident. Each did it by controlling the bottleneck of civilization, the one resource every rival needed but couldn't easily replace. And history shows that whoever holds that bottleneck doesn't just grow richer, they rewrite the rules. In the 19th century, Britain used coal to power its factories, ships, and railways. It didn't just mine coal, it controlled the coaling routes that fueled the world's navies. If you wanted to move goods or armies, you needed Britain's coal. In the 20th century, America ruled through oil. Every car, every plane, every tank ran on it. Whoever controlled oil controlled modern life. And now, in the 21st century, every technology, from AI to renewable energy, depends on rare earth elements. Without them, there are no chips, no batteries, no defense systems. And China controls the tap. When the West looked at China, it saw a cheap factory, not a strategic competitor. When the West chose to go green, China chose to get dirty. When the West celebrated ESG reports, China built refineries. 2 decades later, the West has clean air, and China has the world's supply chain. Every energy crisis teaches the same lesson. Whoever controls the resource controls the politics. You can print more money, but you can't print neodymium. You can build more apps, but you can't build magnets without dysprosium. And you can make more promises, but without raw materials, they're just words. Today, the global economy is walking on a tightrope. One side is clean, the other is dependent. Every new electric car, every wind turbine, every solar panel makes China stronger. The greener the world becomes, the more it needs the country that once chose to be gray. That's the paradox of this age. The world's cleanliness is powered by China's pollution. But the real issue isn't material, it's mindset. The West believed that markets will fix everything, but rare earths aren't stocks. You can't diversify your way out of dependence when 90% of processing sits inside one border. That's not a market. That's a monopoly, politely disguised as globalization. Washington is finally waking up. It's throwing billions at critical mineral projects, forming alliances with Australia, Canada, and Japan. But even if those mines open, the ore still needs to be refined. And the only country that can do that at scale is still China. The United States is trying to rebuild a supply chain it abandoned 30 years ago. China just has to stay still. In this race, one side is running, the other is waiting, and still winning. The world has seen this movie before. When OPEC turned off the oil taps, America begged. When Russia cut off gas, Europe froze. Now China doesn't need to do anything. It just needs to keep its hands on the lever and let the rest of the world choke on its own dependence. Rare earths aren't weapons, they're leverage. The quietest, most effective form of power on Earth. A kind of control that doesn't explode, it simply stops things from moving. In this new age, wars aren't about borders anymore, they're about bottlenecks. And the winner isn't the one with the biggest army, it's the one with the smallest number of choke points, all under its command. For more than 2 centuries, every superpower has been built on a single resource. Britain rose on coal, America ruled through oil, and China is shaping its empire through the dust beneath our feet. But the frightening part isn't how much China owns, it's how long they've been planning to own it. While the world dismissed them as a factory, they were quietly building the foundations of a new hierarchy, one where the buyer depends on the seller, and the clean world depends on the dirty one. China didn't just dominate mining, it engineered the global system around it. Every factory, every motor, every battery was designed to rely on what only they could refine. That isn't luck, that's architecture. The United States and its allies made the same mistake every empire eventually makes. They confused comfort for security. They thought pollution was the problem, when in truth, dependence was. Now they find themselves in a world where every solar panel, every electric car, every AI chip, and every guided missile depends on the same supply chain. One country's environmental sacrifice became another's geopolitical weapon. And that's the genius and the danger of China's rare earth monopoly. It doesn't conquer nations. It makes them choose between ideals and survival. This is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new kind of war. A quiet one. No bullets, no bombs, just contracts, export bans, and dependencies. A war fought not for land, but for the materials that make modern life possible. The lesson is simple. Real power never sits in money. It sits in matter, in the things you can touch, but no longer control. And in this new age of AI, the most valuable resource on Earth is not data, not oil, not gold, but the invisible dust that keeps everything running. China didn't win because it was richer, or smarter, or more innovative. It won because it was willing to do what everyone else refused to do. It accepted the cost, swallowed the pollution, and built the infrastructure that the rest of the world needed, but didn't want to see. Now, the same countries that once called China dirty are buying clean energy from the empire built on its dirt. That's not irony, that's strategy. The world stands at a crossroads. Every nation must now decide, do you want to be moral today or independent tomorrow? Because in this century, the one who controls the material world controls the digital one too. And in that contest, the country that embraced the dirt yesterday is now selling the clean future to everyone else.